Does the NFL draft need to be delayed and or changed? Let's bring John McMullen in, 97.3 ESPN.com. And, of course, at JF McMullen. Also, congratulations, John, adding some more stripes to the Sports Illustrated Eagles coverage as well, pal. Good. Congratulations to you.
Thank you, Mike. As far as the NFL draft goes, though, I think a lot of it depends on what the league wants to do. If they want fan participation, it's going to have to be pushed back. But it can be accomplished. What you need to do can easily be accomplished without the fans. So it's kind of how they want to go about it. My thought process is, from the draft standpoint, it's far enough away that you're hopeful things will start heading in a positive direction, and you can probably go on with it without the fan involvement. But that's pretty much the decision you have to make. Do you want to do that, or do you want to hold off? Because it is the off season, and all these, whether it's the start of free agency, whether it's the new league year, all these are arbitrary dates that can easily be moved if they want them to be moved, because it's the off season.
Yeah, that's the thing is, you could do the draft and you don't have to have all the teams in one place. You can do that in an empty building. You can, heck, the XFL did it via Twitter. I mean, there's a way to announce the picks, but how important is it to the NFL to have this made-for-television event that they've created with people there and profit off of it?
Well, I think it's very important, but I think everybody has come to the realization, not just the NFL. I mean, you're going to take significant monetary hits. There's no way around it. It goes far outside of sports. But, I mean, the NCAA would be the biggest example. I mean, they're just devastated from the loss of revenue from the tournament. I mean, that basically funds 80% of the NCAA each and every year, because they don't get nearly as much money from the football revenue streams. So it becomes almost crippling. And we've seen it with, I talked about lesser leagues. You talk about the XFL, that's crippling. That league may not recover. So we talk about budgeting for 3 years of losses. Well, you can't budget for this. Yeah, I mean, you look at Atlantic City, you look at the gaming industry. Well, how do you budget for that loss of revenue? People have talked about major events moving back, whether it's the NBA Finals, the NHL Stanley Cup, even WrestleMania. We've talked about that in the past. Think about all the ancillary revenue generated for not only local communities that host those types of events, but conventions and people that put on things as a satellite to the big event, because the big event is in town. And I've talked about this since day one. On a micro level, obviously, people are concerned about their health, their family's health. On a macro level, this is just devastating to the country as a whole, because it's going to destroy the economy. The only question is, how much is it going to destroy the economy, and how quickly can you bounce back? People like the NFL can bounce back a lot quicker than most everybody else.
Well, and it also helps that they're not in their game season right now. So as we've kind of talked about, they've kind of avoided and navigated around it a little bit. However, there are some impacts to this, John, in terms of, scouting departments. They're not traveling, right? You got stuff like that. You've got, all sorts of things that have been thrown at them that they are trying to navigate themselves around. When you look at scouting, pro days, the new league year, the annual league meetings, the CBA is still not worked out, and as we've kind of touched on, the draft. So they are just navigating around off-season stuff, so while everybody else is trying to navigate around in-season stuff.
Yeah, and that's definitely easier. When you were off yesterday, I mentioned that with Ryan and Josh.
I was in a coronavirus meeting.
He was quarantined.
There you go. So you have to deal with that. And that's a perfect example of, impacting a business. You have to have these discussions. You have to do these things. But, yeah, from the NFL standpoint, we're a little bit lucky that it's happened in the off season. And as I mentioned, the NFL has done a tremendous job staying on the radar by setting up its calendar the way it has. I talk about it a lot. It's almost seamless. You go from the Super Bowl to the Senior Bowl, the Combine, pro days, the draft, and then all of a sudden you're kicking off off-season work. But again, that's designed to keep the league in everyone's purview, everyone interested. They do a tremendous job with that, as I said, but it's easily changed. And you already saw it with the league meetings, the annual league meetings. Well, typically they're in the spring. They canceled that. So it'll just be kicked back a couple months, and they'll do the coach's breakfast and all that type of thing a couple months down the line. And I've still said, and I put this on Twitter today, the NFL continues to say the plan is to start the league year on the March 18th. I still think ultimately they kick that back. I do think they want to get the CBA vote out of the way, and that's why they're keeping it as is right now. Once that's ratified, I think you're going to see them quickly kick back the start of the new league year, because there's no real reason that they can't, to be honest. And it's more optics than anything else. It doesn't accomplish anything. It doesn't make any bit of a difference. But when this kind of thing is happening, I think the optics are bad when you're talking about handing out $85 million to a cornerback. I think people don't want to deal with that. I think the optics are bad. And I think the NFL will ultimately realize that.
John, let's just say that it was in season for all of this. And the reason why I'm getting here is, the NBA is now releasing information regarding their CBA. And players are, there's like a doomsday part in it where when something like this happens, players do not get paid. How does that impact the NFL and their current and potential new one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a doomsday clause. I don't know how they would handle that, to be honest. Judging by the NFL and what they've done in the past, if they have a way to get out of something, they're going to get out of it. So they're not going to be altruistic. If they don't have to pay the players, they're not going to pay the players. I don't think there's any question about that. But I think you and I, Ryan, have talked about this a lot. I think everybody expects the NFL to be like that. I think in the NBA they expect differently, because they do handle themselves better from a public relations standpoint. But I always say that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And the best example I give of this is the NBA changing owners' names. They're no longer owners. They're now governors due to the sensitivity of certain people that complained about that. But I always say, what does that accomplish? Nothing changes. They still own the team. They're still in control of it. There's no real, other than semantics, other than making a few people feel better, there's no real world consequence to doing something like that. And that's what the NBA has been very good at. The NFL has been very poor at. Bottom line is, though, a billionaire is a billionaire, and they get to be a billionaire for a reason. Yeah. And they're not giving out handouts if they don't have to. And that's just honest, real-life truth. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
Yeah, when you say it doesn't matter, I would say that I agree with you, but that's for the NFL. You know what I mean? Like the NBA, I give them credit for what they do because I think it matters to them. The NFL is just such a moneymaker where when you say it doesn't matter, I would say, yes, I agree. That applies to the National Football League.
Well, I mean, I use the example, in other words, certain examples. I mean, if there's real-world consequences, yeah, I point me to them and I'll make a judgment on that. I'm saying in certain instances, if you're just doing things for public relations points and there's no real world change or real world effect, that doesn't really help anyone other than making maybe a small group feel better. So, I mean, if that's what you're trying to accomplish, that's great. But again, there's no accomplishment. There's no, NBA owners are not going to pay the players unless they have to. NFL owners are not going to pay their players unless they have to. There's no difference, but if you want to couch it differently, is that meaningful? I don't know. That's up to the individual.
All right, we're talking with John McMullen, Football at 4, at JF McMullen here on the Sports Bash. Do you think that the start of free agency is going to get delayed?
I do. Because of the optics and because of, I think, the hits the NFL will take. Now,
can you explain, though, to the listener who might say, why would that be delayed? There's not a crowd. This isn't an event where people are watching. What is the reasoning behind the delay if everything is, essentially, you could do it on the telephone. Hey, are you interested in playing? You know what I mean? Like, you could do it on a FaceTime or whatever app
Carrier
you use.
pigeon,
right.
Whatever.
Yeah, optics. There's no, and that's what I'm saying. There's no difference between doing the work they need to do on March 18th versus April 18th, if you want to kick it back 4 weeks, other than if they start March 18th, you're going to see a series of criticisms online, all over, saying this league doesn't care about people. And by the way, the NFL might not push it back because they've been very poor in which I always have talked with Ryan. They're very poor with public relations. They're very poor at identifying these types of situations. But they're going to take some massive, massive hits if they go along business as usual. Do I think it's fair? No, because of what you just said. All this can be accomplished in easily. And it's not going to affect anyone from a health standpoint. It should be business as usual, but they're going to take hits. And I think ultimately somebody in the office is going to wake up after the CBA is ratified and say, if we continue to do this, we're going to get massacred online. So why don't we just hold off because it's not that big of a deal. Ultimately, that's what I think is going to happen. But the NFL has also proven time and time again that they're often tone deaf to things like that. Either way, I
don't know that I think people were going to. I feel like it's like, hey, this is a sporting quote unquote event going on that we can kind of be like take away from the distract. I don't know, maybe.
Well, you're certainly going to have fans tremendously interested. Fans more often than not, hardcore football fans will be disappointed, incredibly disappointed, if the new league year is pushed back, because it is. And we mentioned this yesterday on the show. That's what sports is, a distraction. It's supposed to be able to take your mind off that. I agree with that sentiment that it would actually be helpful for at least the people that like professional football to get their minds off some of the other things going on. I think it would be tremendously helpful. But I do think you're going to have a different sentiment. Forget about ESPN. Think about CNN. The people on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, news people, they're going to say this is tone deaf, and they're going to criticize the league. Mark my words.
John, what is, and I know you've touched on this in different degrees, but just realistically here, what is the worst case scenario as a direct result of all of this for the NFL?
Worst case scenario, I think, is already happened. It's just not provable, and it is the television contracts, and that's what I talked about, going full circle to the beginning of this conversation. I think the Dow was at 29,000. when the owners agreed to send the CBA back to the players to be ratified. It's now down 8,000-9,000 points, depending on the day, depending on the hour. The economy is only going to go further into the tank from this point forward. Question is, how difficult does it get? And we should all cross our fingers that it doesn't get too difficult. But I think they've already lost money when you start negotiating these contracts. And we're talking billions and billions of dollars. So I talked about the framework of the CBA, the media kicker. They were projecting anywhere from a 60% increase to a 120% increase. That will give you sort of a ballpark estimate. If they get no increase, if they get a 10% increase, 20% increase, you kind of see what impact it has had, and that affects both, obviously, the owners and the players and the industry as a whole. Less money means less money to split. And I think it's that will be the biggest impact on everyone. And that's what I said, not just sports, but life in general. Unless you're obviously the caveat, and that's why I said micro versus macro. People get sick, that's much more difficult. But as the society as a whole, the bigger impact of this will be economics.
John McMullen, couple actual player news here, because guys are, just because everything is stopped, the NFL is still cutting guys, releasing guys, and things are happening over there, and a lot happened today. Some names you're going to know. 2 big Vikings on the streets. Linval Joseph, a defensive tackle who, still, I don't want to say is at the top of his game, a veteran, had a decent year last year. Xavier Rhodes, this guy was considered one of the best in the league not too long ago, 29 years old, but, Philly, 2 guys with names. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we've talked about Rhodes a lot because Rhodes was an all-pro, I think, 3 years ago. In the last 2 years, he's completely fallen off a cliff. And I've mentioned him specifically as an example of a player at that position where how fluid it is, and the fact that he went from being a top 5 corner to a bottom 5 corner. And that's pretty amazing.
Just like that.
It's amazing how quickly that position moves. Same thing happened to Josh Norman. We just talked about Trumaine Johnson earlier this week. It is amazing. These were all top 10 cornerbacks who were just awful last season. So that's a really difficult position to evaluate for a number of reasons. But no, Rhodes is obviously not the type of player the Eagles are looking for. They want an ascending corner, not a descending corner. Now, the money's not going to be very much because he has played so poorly. He's not going to cost anyone all that much money. Joseph is a little bit better, but he's coming off an injury-plagued year. He's getting older, and he's a run stuffer. And at his height, he was maybe the best run stuffer in the entire NFL. But that's another position that's been devalued. 2 down defensive linemen have been devalued in this league, and he kind of fits in that category. So I don't think either of them makes sense as aging players for the Eagles, but it does give you a perfect example of the salary cap. And we talk about all the hand-wringing because Minnesota came into this process with the least amount of cap space in the league. They cut 2 players. They have all the cap space they need. So for everyone who complains about cap space and worries about cap space, I talk about it all the time. This is the softest cap in the world. It's not an issue. It's never an issue. You saw it 2 years ago with the Eagles when they were really up against it. Didn't matter. It doesn't matter. It never matters. Now, it's a little bit different. If you're Indianapolis and you have $85 million, you can go into different ranges. But generally, off seasons and signing players and getting players in free agency, getting players in the draft, always has more to do with decision making than money.
John, that you discussing that the cornerback position is devalued and it's really difficult and tough for teams to evaluate.
No, I don't think it's devalued.
Well,
I was talking defensive tackle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
but
just
prior to that, go ahead.
Cornerback isn't devalued. It's just difficult. In fact, corner, if you were putting it up and saying what are the valuation of positions in the NFL, it's obviously quarterback number one, then it's edge rusher, and then corner is in the conversation for being next. You could argue a few other positions, but corner's in that conversation. So everybody wants corners. The problem is it moves so fast at that position. You kind of know if you're really good at certain positions, you're going to have a window. At corner, you can be really good. And I just mentioned those three names, Rhodes, Norman, Johnson. You could be at the top of the NFL one year and be back at the bottom the next. It's amazing how quick it moves.
Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. By the way, Delaney Walker's another pretty big free agent out there. Obviously, the Eagles don't have a need at that position. Yannick Ngakoue has signed or got the tag placed on him, as did Hunter Henry. So you're seeing some movement in the NFL. The free agency period could open next week. We will keep our eye on that. And by the way, real quick, John, the XFL players, they are free to sign with anybody they want, correct?
Yeah, they're going to be free to sign anybody anywhere they want after the exit interviews. Much of them happen today, and it'll be interesting because it's sort of another level. And the NFL was obviously expecting it, but they were expecting it late April. Now they have to add that to their plate. And if you think about it, you have draft prep and you can't have top 30 visits anymore. You can't go to pro days. Everybody's basically grounded from travel. You got free agency about to start unless they do kick it back. And now you have to cull through the XFL, which isn't as important. But there are players in that league that you can find some value if you make the right decision. So it's just another glut of players. Those personnel departments who are already working remotely, they have to get through and they have to figure out which of these guys can help. And I think there will be players from that league that can help.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, you got to see a game live in person. I was stripped of that opportunity. I was supposed to go Saturday in Tampa, and that will not happen, unfortunately. Although our friend Colin Thompson.
I got an inaugural New York Guardians leather-bound notebook. That might be history, man.
Yeah, the LA Extreme are still your XFL champions going back to 2001. He's John McMullen at JF McMullen. And
Real quick, though, Steve Spurrier was in charge in Houston. He would have declared himself the champions.
That's true. The 4-0 or 5-0 Roughnecks played pretty well. All right, Johnny Mac, take care. Have a good weekend, man.
All right, thanks, guys.
Eli August, the PRV, the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.